Alright, so I figured I'd shoot a video on my wicking containers, or some people refer to this as wicking beds, and I'm going to show you how I set those up. I can't show you me starting them from the beginning because these are done already, and I'm not going to buy any more of these containers to show you me building it from scratch and so on and so on. But I'll go over how it works, and I'll basically show you, how I set it up, and I'll try to just, touch main points on it and what you should look for, what you shouldn't look for, and some of the do's and don'ts, because I have been running these now for a couple of years, and there's some things about these wicking beds that I don't like. For example, here's a 5-gallon self-watering container. It's basically the same principle as those wicking beds, except this is a very small version of it. And I like these, but you can't run plants in them for a long period of time. And the reason why is the soil tends to, no matter how much nutrients you feed it, the soil just tends to, I don't know, the roots seem to die out in it. It could be funguses or Pythium or any of these things that live within a moist area of your, soil, and it causes diseases to the plant eventually. They're good for a season, but to run them like year in and year out for years for a plant or a tree, I probably wouldn't recommend that. I'm going to do a video specifically on the 5-gallon watering containers when I get to filling these and doing the pots for them and everything. I will go over exactly what I'm doing and how I set my soil up and how I built it, and just my interpretation. It's nothing that nobody else doesn't have videos on, but this is my interpretation. Alright, so you can get these totes at, what is that, Lowe's or Home Depot. You can get these at Lowe's or Home Depot for like, I don't remember what I paid, $5 or $10. It comes with a lid, and it comes with the bottom, okay? And so what I do, in my case, I didn't want to spend the money on the PVC that you can buy. You can buy PVC and cut pieces of PVC. So you set up the bottom water part. See, the water level basically sits up to this rim that I put in here. Okay, this is all measured out. I screwed this to it. Okay, this whole bottom fills up with water, and then from there the water wicks up into your bed in here. I also have a drain in here, which is an overflow drain. I'm trying to get you on there and see that. Okay, that just pops in and out. That doesn't have to be waterproof. You don't even need to put a pipe in there if you're doing them outside. You just want that water to drain out in the event that it doesn't go into the bed of your soil, because if you do that, the soil will absolutely 100% positively begin to rot. And when it starts to get that swamp, you ever smell like swampy soil? Like you pull up a plant and it stinks like it's rotting and stunk. The soil's rotten. That's because it's very high in anaerobics, and it's basically rotting. And most plants can't live and thrive in that. They can't survive in that type of soil condition. You don't want that. You never want to smell soil that starts to smell like it's rotting. That's one of the ways you can tell if your plant is getting too much water. If your pots are getting too much water and you pull out the pot in the bottom, and the bottom of that pot starts to smell swampy or skunky, or it smells, like waste. It smells like human waste almost. It's rotting and whatnot like that. If it starts smelling like that, you have to change that soil immediately and wash those roots out and get those roots out of that, because that's beginning to rot. You don't want that situation. Okay, so basically what I do is bring you over here. I know I just showed you a finished one. I'm getting ready to fill my wicking thing. So basically what I do, if you don't want to screw those little ledges to the side, I had that as leftover material. I have the screws left over. There's all this stuff I didn't have to buy. The only thing I bought was a container. So if you don't want to do that, you got to buy PVC. If you buy PVC and you cut it to the right height, and then you just lay this pop in there like that, you're good to go. No problem. You don't need to do a lot of extra screwing and measuring. It's a lot of extra work. You don't need to do that. Okay? So just for the sake of trying to keep this video short, you don't need to screw that down. You can cut PVC the height that this is. You see the height from where my hand goes to the bottom of this plate. You cut it, all those pieces at that height, and then you put them in there, put that on top, you're good to go. You could use plastic bottles if you want, like 1 liter bottles, lay them on their side. I've seen people do that. Make sure they're capped off, lay them on there. It'll sit in there nice. It won't hold a lot of water. It displaces a lot of water. The idea is not to displace the water, so the water sits in there. But you do not want this thing to push down into the water where this is always wet. That you don't want. You only want the water to come through your wicking cups. Okay? But your other option is you can buy gravel, what they call pea gravel, or it's that gray gravel that you buy for your, I don't know, driveways, walkways. For concrete, when you're mixing cement or concrete, you add that gravel to it. They call it aggregate. You could use that instead if you want, and simply put that on the bottom. That would be your best idea. The only problem with that is that it displaces a lot of water when you do that, and you're not going to have the amount of water. It's almost going to be pointless making it a waterless system if there's no water in it, because believe me, I'm going to plant 6 plants in here, but if you're going to plant 6 to 8 plants, depending on what you're planting, they'll suck that water up very quickly within a day or two. On a hot day in the greenhouse here where it gets 100, 120, that water will wick right out of there. That'll be gone in like 1 to 2 days. So I'm filling these every 1 to 2 days with 6 plants, say. All right, just so keep that in mind. If you fill it with gravel, which is great, it's not going to be a lot of water in there for them plants to wick up. All right, it's not much, believe me. So those are your options. The next thing I do, you don't have to do this, but the next thing I do is I lay down this fabric cloth inside. Okay, I pre-cut the holes and all that stuff. I basically built these, used them. Now I'm rebuilt. I cleaned them up. Now I'm putting them back. So I lay down a fabric cloth like that. Then I take these wicking cups that I made out of those little drink containers. I love to use those drink containers, obviously, because they're so plentiful, and I don't have to buy. It's something less I have to buy. Yeah, they'll probably emit some small amounts of plasticizers into the water. I mean, there's anything that has plastic, these containers, your pipe, your PVC, everything's going to emit a certain amount of plasticizer. And that depends on what the plastic is made out of. Anything that you generally see that says recyclable is generally good for you, because that means they're usually using some kind of high-density polypropylene, which is usually made from plant-based oils and not petroleum-based oils. They're made so they're usable for human consumption. Okay? Certain things aren't made for human consumption. For example, these containers are not made for human consumption, so they may not necessarily be made out of high-density polypropylene or polyethylene, and because of that reason, they may emit more plasticizers, but all plastics emit plasticizers, whether higher or lower. But in order to be used for human consumption, it has to be a very low plasticizer emittance. That's the best way for me to put it. I mean, I don't know the exact terminology. So these cups are generally used for human consumption. They're used for, I get my iced teas out of these, and because of that reason, these cups are made out of a recyclable high-density polypropylene or polyethylene or some kind of a food-grade plastic that does not generally emit high amounts of plasticizers. Okay, now, the next thing I do is I just insert my cups in here like that. And that's it. Now it's bottomed out at the bottom of the pail. You can see that this is set at the right height, right? And I do that for both sides. And then I insert which I still got to cut the hole for this. Normally I go right through it. There's a hole in here for it. I don't know where it is. I got it in the back. Where is it? Yeah, I put it in the back. It's supposed to be in the front. I got to flip it around. I'm just doing this for video. There's a pipe that fills, and that pipe goes directly down to the reservoir down here, and it fills it up. When it fills up, it drains out of that little pipe here, the overflow. So the idea is that this is always filled with water. It never goes any higher than this plastic base down here. you generally want to keep it about 1/2 of an inch to an inch below this base. So make sure you figure, like I made this a little low because of the top. Let me get this out. I made this a little low because this is the top to here. If you see, that's originally what this is. This is the lid. I cut the lid out with a little Dremel drill, and I turned it into my base. Okay? So because of the way I cut it, and I cut this thing out and put it down at the base, because of that reason, I had to put it lower than I would have liked to. I would have preferred it to come up about this high. You generally don't need your beds any more than about, I wouldn't make them any more than 8 to 10 inches max. I wouldn't go any more than 10 inches. 10 inches is even too deep. I've had these wicking beds filled to the top like this with a mound on top, right? And growing in them, they never wick they could never wick enough water to fill the entire bed that deep. It just didn't work correctly. It needs to be lower. The soil level needs to be a little lower. I wouldn't go any more than 8 inches max on your wicking beds. Any deeper than that, it's not going to wick correctly. Yeah, they tell you soil's got to be a special mix. I generally add a lot of the Coco Coir into my mix to make it extra absorbable. And so I do add that into my mix a lot of times, but if you make them 6 to 8 inches deep, you don't have to buy Coco Coir to add to your mix just so it can wick in there. That's how that part goes. We know that. Just remember, just keep it, and so you don't have to fill it up to here with soil, okay? Just come up to like the lid here. That's fine. That's plenty of soil in here, guys. That's plenty soil, okay? So just come up so high, 8 to 10 inches max. Don't go any more than that. The next thing you want to do is take the other half of the lid. Nothing got wasted here. Okay, so I didn't spend a lot of money to build these. The soil cost me more money and that stuff than to build this. Then you just pop this lid on, and that kind of holds it in place, you know, because when this thing fills up with soil, this whole thing, see how this whole thing wants to belly out? Because of that reason, last year I didn't notice, this is my first year using wicking beds, but last year when I filled it up, you could see that the whole thing started pulling out. When it did that, this whole thing collapsed and one side of it fell down. Half the soil was sitting in the water, it began to rot, a lot of plants were dying. That's why, one of the reasons why my plants were dying off that year last year. The first year I didn't have that problem. The second year I had that problem. Alright, so what I have to do now is I have to screw it into these ledges so that does not fall back down into there. Okay? So just keep that in mind. I just want to make a note on that, so if you're doing these. Then the next thing you do is you put your lids on here. And then they tell you you should put plastic over the top of it, cut holes in your plastic, and then let them grow through the holes, and that minimizes weeds coming up and things like that. I'm going to tell you not to do that. And there's reasons why you don't want to put plastic over the top of your wicking beds. That water needs to permeate all the way through the soil, like the soil is breathing and transpiring just like the plant. It's very essential that you do that. If you put a plastic over the top of it, what happens is the inside of it, mosses, and like I use peat moss, and all these things will start to grow underneath that plastic. Unless it's a black plastic where it keeps the light out, those things won't grow. But you're not going to use black plastic. Why? Because black plastic, especially in a greenhouse like this that hits 120 degrees, that black plastic is going to absorb all that extra heat, and these things are going to overheat and cook your plants. That's the second problem you got to worry about with these containers. You can't let these containers get extremely hot. And believe me when I tell you, when you're cooking something in here at 120 degrees, that water in there and that whole container will reach close to those temperatures. So these are all things you got to keep in mind with these wicking beds and pots and self-watering containers and all these things. That soil temperature gets too warm, the plant is going to suffer. It's going to make it dramatic. It's one of the reasons why most of my pepper plants were dying last year, and I let them go because I knew they were mostly damaged. I seen them dying back way before I gave up on them. They tell you to cover it with plastic, cut your holes, and that's no good. That soil has got to breathe, guys. That soil. If that soil doesn't breathe, what happens? What did we just talk about that happens if your soil is wet and sitting in the water down below and it's not breathing? What happens? That's right, it begins to rot. A fungus will begin to grow in your soil and then begin to cause what's known as root rot. And root rot is a disease caused by a specific fungal or several different specific fungals or bacteria that will live in that part of the soil and cause that problem. And so you don't want this soil to be wet and soaking and not be able to, it has to breathe. Okay, it's going to breathe through this, see this hole here? That hole is going to allow air to get into the bottom of my bed. It's also going to allow the air to slowly percolate and permeate up through the soil. It's going to keep the soil from becoming waterlogged. It's going to allow certain levels of aerobic and anaerobic bacteria and mycorrhizae and all that will live in that environment. It's the way it needs to be. And it's a tricky balance because if you don't get it right, it's a failure. If you get it right, you know it's right because your plants will do really, really, really good. Okay, yeah, you do want to add some stuff to it, some rock dust, some humic acid. You want to add your nutrients, and you're going to top water this as well. You're going to make sure that, like yes, I will keep this bed generally full of water, providing this isn't sitting in water. I will keep that reservoir full of water. But when I go to water unless this is really low, and that does eventually use its water up through hot days, that will get absorbed, even with me top watering, but generally I want to top water and wash down any salts that build up from me watering with either fertilizers or Epsom salts and things like that, or C90. Any of these things, you kind of want to wash that out of your soil. You don't want it to build up in your soil. So you have to top water no matter what. A lot of people tell you can only use the tube to fill the bottom, let it wick it. No, you have to top water. You got to wash that soil down. When you're using additives to your soil, you can't let them build up like salts. Anything will become a problem. Even Epsom salt. As much Epsom salt as I use in my containers, I still have to wash them out into the bottom wicking bed, eventually overflow it out, and you're good to go. You need to top water regardless, okay? But you don't top water very often. Every once in a while. Once, twice a week, that's it. The plants will generally put their roots all the way down and get their water from the lower part of that container. So, as far as the plastic goes, I know this is a long video. I'm probably going to have to do this in 2 parts. This is going to be long. As far as the plastic over the top goes and you planting through the little holes, don't do it. It needs to breathe. That soil needs to breathe. If you see a weed come up, you just pluck it out. Okay? If you want to mulch the top of it with a light mulch, I wouldn't recommend wood chips unless it's heavily composted wood chips, which are black. You can buy that in a you can buy those heavily composted wood mulch, hardwood mulch in Lowe's for $2 or $3 a bag, and you'll generally need about 1 or 3/4 of a bag for each one of these. You'll have you're going to need, if you have 10 containers, you'll probably need about 7 or 8 of those bags. I usually wait till they go on sale, or I look for a rip bag and I buy those, and then I'll mulch the top of it. But you don't have to. Mulch is good to have because it does kind of retain the moisture from over evaporating out of the soil, but at the same time it keeps the soil cool, and it also keeps the weeds down, and it also slows that moisture down. There's a balance, guys. It's the balance you got to look for. You got to find a balance that works for you with these containers. You can't just slop them together and make them and expect them to work. They could either work for you or they can be a complete failure. Last year, most of my tomatoes were suffering heavily. I attributed a lot of that to the heat, which it was, but it was also contributed to the soil being just old soil, because I didn't replace the soil in the wicking beds, and it just, part of these were collapsed and in the water, and they were soaking up and rotting. I knew it because I took the soil out and I smelled it. I said, that's the end of that. Sorry if this is a long video, but some of you might be interested in doing this, and for me to upload this video in 1080p, 30-minute video or 40-minute video, that's like 6 or 7 hours to upload it. So I'm hoping that some of you will actually utilize this information. Maybe try it for yourself. You might see these containers at Lowe's or Home Depot, and you might want to try it. And you could, and it does work, but it's going to be a little bit of a balance. Nobody really told me this stuff when I was doing it. I watched videos on wicking beds and self-watering containers, and I thought I knew what I was doing until I actually did it and realized that there's all these other things that nobody really talks about in their videos about these self-watering containers and wicking beds that they don't talk about, that I am telling you about, that I've even went back to their channels later and looked at, and they've stopped using wicking beds because they're experiencing the same problems that I'm describing to you. It's not that they don't work. You can't set up a huge wicking bed. I've seen people set up wicking beds that were, I don't know, 8 by 8, filled with rock on the bottom and tubes and all this work they went into doing it, thinking that's permanent. You know, once you set that up, and then there's that soil. They leave the soil and they just keep planting and adding soil like it's a regular garden, but they got that deep water. Remember what I told you about that root rot? Remember what I told you? That soil has to be removed, has to be turned into the light. You have to, like, see here? I took all the soil out of these wicking beds. You see that big pile right there? It's about 2 cubic yards of compost or soil, garden soil that I've mixed. That sits out there for about a day or two, okay? That's going to rain on it, sit out there for a day or two. It's going to sequester the nitrogen and carbon from the air. And as it does that, and it rains, and the worms start going in, and the birds start feeding it, after roughly about a week or so, should be spread out a little bit thinner. I know it's a little heavy right now, but it should have actually sat through the winter, is what it should have did. Because that's when you sequester the most nitrogen in your soil from the atmosphere. But I didn't do that. I didn't have time. But that soil will eventually correct itself. If you stick your hands in certain parts of that soil and you pull it up to your nose and you go to smell it, it's going to smell swamp, like an old swampy soil with that swamp gas smell, that swampy, fart smell. I don't know what any word. It stinks like farts, When it smells like that, that's the pythium. Those are the things that you don't want to introduce into your wicking beds. So that corrects itself as long as if it's introduced to oxygen. As long as if you aerate that back into the oxygen, that all dies. The soil is self-corrected. It's sequestered the nitrogen and carbon from the air. And next thing you know, your soil is revitalized like brand new. That soil will never go bad for you. It might need nutrients, like rock dust nutrients and stuff, but the soil itself will never go bad. You got plenty of carbon and stuff for your plants to make plant matter, leaves and stems and fruits. It has what it needs in there. So you just need to revitalize it, and the way you do that is to put it out in the winter, like I said, and leave it out. But for the wicking containers, I took it out a little late. I don't know if I should have actually. I can't spread it out because I did my garden already, as you see. All right, but I need to let that aerate. And I am going to have to break it up with the shovel and turn it a couple times. And hopefully it rains. It's a little cloudy. Hopefully it rains. And then that will re-energize it. And then I can mix it with new peat moss and things like that. My Coco Coir, my peat moss. Well, it doesn't need perlite because you can see over here it's got tons and tons of perlite in there. I mean, there's 50-pound bags of perlite and that stuff. So. But generally, that's it. You just revitalize it, and then you're ready back for your wicking bed. All right, so, yes, you have to top water these. I know a lot of people say, no, you just water it through the bottom. If you top water it, you're going to get, with tomatoes, you get blight and early blight and late blight. And, yeah. All right, so you want to avoid all of that. So you get the mulch. You get the mulch, and it eliminates that problem. But you still have to top water. You have to wash out the salts that build up in your soil from you adding your fertilizers, your Epsom salts, and God knows whatever else you add. Even if you're adding lime and rock dust to the water, that needs to be kind of wash itself down to the bottom anyway. All right? So you got to wash them out. You have to wash your beds out. It's just the way it works. And don't put plastic over the top of them, like I told you. Don't, like you see a lot of these guys are like, they build these things and they mound all the way up like that. It looks great and everything. They put the plastic on it and all. And that might be good for the first 3 or 4 months, but then that ecosystem in that bed's going to collapse sooner or later. Because, number one, it can't wick the water up that high. It just doesn't wick it. I've done it already. It doesn't wick it unless you built like one of these, like these wicking cups. And unless you built that wicking cup so it came up all the way this high with big holes around it, and it was like a tube filled, like these 2 things were filled with Coco Coir. You don't need that. That's ridiculous. 6 to 8 inches on your soil, okay? 6 to 8 inches, that's all you need. Your plants are going to grow fine. All the extra roots and everything that want to grow deep into the water. You have spots in here, like over here. You have spots in here. It'll get those roots down and into that lower reservoir and dangle its roots in that water and soak the water that it wants directly from it, because the plants do want to drink. So it won't put many roots, but it will have a certain set of roots that it will drive that'll go specifically to the water, to the deep water, while the rest of this thing could be like semi-dry but not real dry, and it doesn't care. As long as if it gets 1 or 2 waterings a week through the top, you're going to be fine. All right? And I think that's about it. Like I say, I'll do a video on my self-watering 5-gallon bucket containers, how I set those up, the do's and don'ts with those. The main and most important thing to keep in mind with these self-watering containers is you got to keep them cool. I don't care what you have to do to keep these cool, but if they get hot, if they get too warm, you're going to have a problem with the growth of that plant. The plant will not grow correctly. You'll know it. You'll know your plants. Like I know my pepper plants. I know when something's a problem. Whether it's, you know, there could be 5 million different things that cause a plant to stunt or not produce fruit correctly or not grow to the full size. There's could be 5 million things, but you know there's a problem with your plant. You know its growing behavior. And so if I grow pepper plants, I start to see them all doing the same weird thing, all coming out of this container. It has to be something to do with the environment of the container that is causing that growth. Whereas I got plants growing in my pots, put them in a pot, boom, they grow big and huge. I got peppers. I'm happy with them. Put them in these containers, all of a sudden they start suffering. One of the reasons why is the temperature of the soil. It's getting too hot. So you have to keep the sun off the soil. Somehow you got to keep the, even more than the soil. I had those 5-gallon buckets up on my deck, and I was showing you my 2- and 3-year bell peppers. It was getting so hot on the deck, I could have almost sworn that I felt the water on the inside of that pail bubbling in there from boiling. That's how hot it was getting on that deck. That water was almost boiling in the container. You couldn't even put your hand on that bucket. That's how hot it got. It damaged the whole root system. It damaged it. That's why they weren't going to make it through the winter. Some of them actually did. Most of what you've seen that I brought in with my pepper plants, the reason why they survived is because they were in here and not the greenhouse. You can't let the root systems get hot, is what I'm trying to tell you. If these things are sitting in sunlight and they're baking in the sun, I guarantee you're going to have a problem. I've seen guys, what they do is they dig big holes, they put the wicking containers in the ground, and then they just cover it with, I don't know, wood chips or dirt. That's a lot of work. At that point, you're better off just planting in the ground, you know. I would say my advice to you is if you do these containers and you want to keep them cool, you can get a couple truckloads of wood chips after everything's done, like I told you. You can cover all the way around the containers, not on top of the soil, but all the way around the containers. Put a nice big heaping pile of wood chips all the way around it so the heat can't get past that and it stays cool. The idea of this is to keep it cool. It has to stay cool. These containers, they get very hot in the sunlight. Believe me, that's one of the downfalls of, that's one of the major downfalls of these self-watering containers. But yeah, do I like them? Yeah, I would say I like them. They work great. They're a little bit of a maintenance situation now that I'm already neck deep in this already. Had I known it was this much of a pain in the neck for me to kind of keep it going and all these, I could change the soil anyway. So being I'm doing this all anyway, what's the point? I mean, I do just as good in pots as I do with this thing. So it didn't really help me that much. I mean, yeah, it does give you a little bit more water per se, I guess. You know, you're getting that extra water on the bottom. And I still water, like coming out here and watering every day anyway. So it's a big deal. So is there an advantage to doing this? Now that I've used it for a couple of years, not really. Unless you're going to fill, like I told you, the temperatures offsets all these other little problems I told you about. The wicking problems, too deep of a bed and it doesn't want to wick all the way up to the top. That's one thing. It not being able to breathe, potentially the lower part of the soil becoming anaerobic, the temperature of the thing cooking and beginning to heat up and boiling your root systems deep down. It's not supposed to do that. Your roots from your plant go real deep like that, not just to look for water, but to escape from the heat. It's trying to get away from that super hot soil. So, you know, there's a lot of disadvantages to doing this. It's fun. It's great. I like it. I'm already set up with it. But would I do it again? Nah. Not really. Not unless I was able to bury the container and control it. The biggest problem I see with these is controlling the temperature of these containers. If this thing was sitting out in direct sunlight, getting cooked every day, those plants, you'd get really crappy results with your plants, no matter what it is you grow. That's my opinion on it. If you could keep that cool indoors, indoors they might work great, where you're controlling the whole temperature of the room. Like this greenhouse gets 120 degrees. Let's say I was able to control the temperature down to 60, 70, and it's the pure sunlight still able to get in and give it the plant the full sunlight. Oh, that would be really good. Yeah, that's hothouse stuff. That's what you see in these hothouses. But in this environment, wild, rancid, and wild and crazy like this, not really. You're just as good as planting out in the garden like this than you are doing this. It's a lot of extra work. Unless you're doing it indoors, you got room in your basement. I personally probably wouldn't do this again. I'll probably do a few of the 5-gallon buckets. Those are good. But these big containers, I'm not a big fan of them. And I was going to build a large wicking bed in my yard, like a 8x8 wicking bed. Dig down about 4 feet, fill up the whole bottom of it with gravel. You know, put the stormwater drain pipes, the 8-inch diameter stormwater drain pipes, and backfill that with gravel. Then put soil on top of that, and then, you know, do your wicking beds on it. Nah, we ain't doing that. You know, it's unnecessary. You don't need to do that. There's other things you can do to provide deep water for the root systems. And I'll do that in a future video. Once I relocate and I'm going to redo my property, I will do that system. I'm not even going to talk about it on here until I'm ready to do it. But as far as these containers go, should you do it? I would say for the price that it might cost you, between $15 and $20, that's a container. That's somebody, you may have the fabric cloth. You buy some pots that'll fit into those holes. You see how those big holes you buy? And you do similar to what I showed you. If you have any questions, I'll try to guide you the best I could on what exactly it is you want to know about it. And, you know, try to give you an idea what, you know, you'd need to buy for it. And that's it. You know, and then try 1 or 2 and see how they work for you. But the main thing is do not fill the soil. This is from here, from where my hand is to like this first lip here, that's probably about 8 inches. That's close to 8 inches, maybe 7 inches. Maybe up to here is like 10. I had this thing filled to the top with a mound on top of it. You're talking almost 2 feet of soil. It was never going to wick that high. The root systems that were, I wasn't top watering, number one. It was trying to put its roots deep to get deep water, but it was really suffering. The higher root systems were suffering because they were really drying out. I put wood chips on top of it, which was bad because the wood chips literally absorbed all the nitrogen out of the soil. It was causing deficiency. A lot of problems, a lot of mistakes last year that we are not doing again this year. We're gonna go for the gold on this one, doing it the right way. All right, so I think I covered everything as far as another thing too you might want to keep in mind is that you see a lot of videos that do these. They show you them yoking these together. Yoke them together, and then they dump out so you can fill them all in one shot. Do not do that. Okay? Listen to what I'm telling you. Do not do that. And the reason why I'm telling you not to do that is because if there's a contamination or a disease in any one of these containers, that disease, especially if it's waterborne, like Pythium or root rot or any of those type of things, is in one container, you can guarantee and bet your bottom dollar it's going to go from this container to that container to that container. So you're losing that nice little thing you have of them being separated. So if one plant gets sick and infected, you lose that by cross-contaminating it with all the same watering system. The best thing for you to do is to water it, and water it like you normally do. When that reservoir is full, it drains. Sometimes I tell you to let it drain a little more than normal. Let that water run out for a minute. Don't worry about wasting water. Let it run out. Let it purge that reservoir that's sitting in there, because that reservoir things can live in it and grow, and you want to flush that out once in a while. Not saying flush it out through the top of the soil. Okay, you don't want to soak this soil to the point where it starts rotting. You want to water it, but not to the point where you're going to cause a rotting problem. You want to flush it out through the tube. Just wash that reservoir out. Get anything that's possibly going to start growing in there. Wash it out. Also, man, this is a long video. Also, too, on the bottom where you're going to be putting your pipe to hold this thing up, like I told you, on that bottom. Don't use anything that has organic material. Keep everything glass or plastic or stone of some sort. But mainly glass or plastic. Don't use anything that's going to be in there that's going to rot. No wood. Okay, no wood. You don't want your soil. You see how I took the this fabric, this landscape fabric, and I put it in there? I do not want the soil to sit on the bottom of this container. I want that reservoir to be pure, clean water. End of story. Don't want to use pond water. I almost don't recommend using rainwater unless you're going to filter it. I use regular, water from the city, street water. Yeah, it's chlorinated and all of that stuff, but whatever. At least it's sanitized on the bottom. That root rot will not survive in there. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about when it comes to root rot, because that's one thing I can really grow good is root rot. And if you really want to avoid that from happening, you definitely want to keep this reservoir purged once in a while. You don't have to do it very often, but every once in a while run it so the water runs out of that tube and just purges that container. But never combine these containers as one system, in my opinion, and try to make it so, oh, I just fill up one thing and it fills up all my containers in one shot. Don't do that, because number one, you're not a hot house, you're not a commercial growing system where you got several thousand of these containers lined up where you need to do that. You got 3 or 4 going. Don't do it, because if you get a problem in one area, it's going to spread to the others. Okay? I also recommend too, if you do decide to go this route with these wicking beds, I also recommend keeping a little distance between them. Yes, I'm a little closer than I'd like to be here, because I don't have the room. This greenhouse is packed already, and I did have these a lot closer before. I've had these as close as this. Now, we don't want that. You want air to get between it, number one. You want to be able to service it. Number two, you want to be able to get in there and maybe pull it aside a little. Something's going on in the back. You can get in there. But you also want a little air to get in there so it doesn't overheat. You want room between the wicking beds, so the plants can outgrow. You don't want to keep it too packed. Yeah, I was going to do put this on a automatic timer. Yeah, you can see that I got the PEX here, and that goes to my zone valves that are up on a wall. And I was going to put this on automatic watering, so it automatically fills that for 5 minutes. All my containers, I'll have a pipe that would go into each one of these fillers and then do it out. But it's not worth it. You start wasting water that way. You only need to replenish that, once every 3 or 4 days. Actually, it's not a bad idea to let them dry out the bottom, like let it soak up all that water, and let those wicking cups, see these wicking cups? Let those wicking cups kind of dry out a little bit. Let those plants soak all that water. That way nothing does start to contaminate. Some people will tell you to use regular soil in here. Don't use regular soil. Use like I have the Coco Coir, because the Coco Coir for some reason doesn't seem to go rancid like rot. You can keep that in water for like a long period of time and it never turns black on you. Like if you filled that cup with peat moss and did that, that cup would turn black and start to stink. Whereas if I do it with the Coco Coir, I don't get that stinking smell, and Coco Coir is an excellent medium to use for wicking. It works really, really good for that. So that's what I do. I use that. I'm happy with it. I know I keep saying I'm going to stop, and I never do. But there's so many things about this that there's really to know. I could go on for this, talking about this for hours. There's so many different angles and things to know and do. Well, here's my other containers. I use these. I actually like these containers a little bit better than the blue ones because these are a little sturdier, stronger. They don't want to bow as easy. Like these bowed right out. And the top parts, the sides that weren't screwed in, like over here. See down there, I put screws to hold it in. See, there's no screws here. When this thing fills up with soil, it just bellies out and that whole thing tends to drop down. This one doesn't really do that, but yeah, it did it too. These all need to get screwed in place. Use gravel, use PVC, you're good to go. Alright, so I think that's it with the video. And let's see how my... Yeah, it's expanding a little bit more now. I just shot a video on this of it not expanding. And now it's expanding a little bit, but not much. This thing should have been sticking out of the top of the container, almost splitting the container by now. Alright, that's the, that is my wicking bed video. See you guys in the next one. Take care. Okay, one of the things I forgot to do, or actually I wasn't really ready to do it because I was just showing you how I was setting it up, but I wanted to add this at the end of the video and just make sure I'm clear on this. And you should do the same thing. You probably don't have to do it, but having experience in the past with root rot in this system, and one of the things you got to really make sure that's done very carefully is to make sure that that storage of water down below isn't getting fully contaminated with like roots and organic matters in there, and it's going to start rotting. There's nothing in the bottom of this reservoir down below. The only thing that's down below in that reservoir is water and plastic, and there's really nothing for any kind of mold or any kind of bacteria to infect it to cause a disease problem. So I make sure that the bottom is as sterile as I can get it. It's not perfect, but I go through the extra measure to make sure that it's sterile. Or one of the other things I do, and you're probably asking, I should have showed it, I didn't show it. I feel bad now that I didn't show it. But I have the wicking cups that I use in here, and none of the material can get into the bottom container through the type of wicking cups and the way I made those. It can't pass into the bottom. Yes, the juice from the soil and anything else in there can leach down, but like I said, I purge this every now and again. I let it dry out sometimes on the bottom, and then I will run the water through it, as you just seen me running it here, and just let it run out like that. Now I'm just setting these up now, but just to make sure I'm clear on it, what I do is once I get my wicking cups in there and packed with what I use for wicking material is the Coco Coir. It seems to work the best. Number one, it's sterile. The material is sterile, and there's nothing inoculating it or no kind of fungi or bacteria in it. So it's sterile to begin with. The only thing I did suggest to do earlier is to rinse out any excess salts or anything that could be in it. So what I do is I pack the wicking cups, and then I make it like a mound like you see here, and then I spread that mound to there's 2 wicking cups in here, so I spread that mound across with this material so this whole thing can become wet when it starts to wick up the water. And when I do that, I rinse it. I run my sprayer. I'm going to do one for you right now. I figured I'd do it while I'm here. So I run my sprayer through it for a while, and I really run the water through the material so it leaches out any excess stuff that I may not want in that container on the bottom. We want those salts out there as much as possible. So you're rinsing it out at the same time, you're packing them, and you're getting somewhere. You're not just wasting time rinsing that stuff, because that can take a long time to actually rinse that without actually wasting the material. So I found this to be the best way to rinse it when you're doing it. Just get your wicking cup, get your plate down, put your cloth over here on, pack them, and then just run the water through it and rinse it that way. It's easier. You do it the other way, you're going to waste a lot of this Coco Coir. I've done it a few ways. This is the quickest and easiest. I can do this whole thing. I did all 10 of these containers today, and I got a bad back, so leaning over and doing these really can be a painful chore for me. I mean, I can work all day and generally not be in pain, but when I gotta lean over, like when you do dishes on a sink, and I gotta lean over and bend down and kind of lean into doing this, oh my God, my back just goes pain on me. All right, so I managed to get all these done. These are all packed. I mean, if anybody really wants to know how I do a wicking cup, I'll set one up for you and just do a model. If you really want to know that bad, it's not that hard to do. There's 1,000 ways you can do it. All right, so first thing we're going to do is going to get our funnel on there. Then I'm going to take my hose and make sure it's on shower. And we're gonna spray down everything in here. Okay, so you want to wash it all out. I already did all this already. I already washed it, but you want to rinse. Keep rinsing that down. Rinse that pile out. Don't worry about if it spreads out a little bit. Don't worry about it. You can clump it back up later. The idea of this is to rinse it out good. You want to make sure there's nothing left in it from last year that can cause, that's probably pretty good. You want to make sure it's rinsed out pretty good. Get any of that salt out. You want to make sure if there is any kind of bacteria or disease or whatever, you're rinsing it out. And here I had a bad mold problem last year. I literally washed everything. It doesn't look like it because there's stuff on the outside, but I rinsed all these walls down with water. Normally I don't do that, but because of the mold problem, I had to really go out and I washed the whole inside of this greenhouse out. Yeah, I know the door's got to get painted or cleaned off. But right now you can see I'm filling it up with a funnel. And I'm waiting for the water to run out. But yeah, I rinsed it good. Even though the mold, that white mold probably won't affect the pepper plants, I'm going to be growing tomatoes probably in here next year because I like to rotate my crops in here. And I just want to make sure all that mold is dead and gone as best I could. Now you see I'm letting it run for a little bit. You can't see it on the camera, but coming out a little bit tan in color, because I rinsed all that extra stuff out. So that's good enough. You see how I'm letting it run a little bit? You want to wash it out a little bit. You don't have to go crazy with it, but you definitely want to run it a little bit. And just make sure, you know, if there's any juices in there from this thing, you don't want to use any of that juice. Now you can see like it all spread out a little bit. I'll clump that back up, make it look like a nice patty like that, and that'll generally work very well. With this container system, again, I don't want to go any higher than 8 to 10 inches because these containers are a little different than these because those are really deep. Those weren't wicking very much good at all. After like 8 to 10 inches, they don't wick very good. They don't wick good at all. Yeah, the tomato plants go deep for the water, but the upper roots, the roots on the top, they suffer because now you got to water it on top, and it didn't work. I didn't like the results of it. So yeah, you want to make sure you're like 8 to 10 inches deep. You can go a little deeper if you want, but not too much. You want that water to kind of wick its way up at least 50 to 60% high into it, and that'll get you through the season. But yeah, you see I'm letting the water run, and I'll just let them do that all, you know, night, and I'll do that every day once the season starts. But yeah, I just wanted to add that in there and show you. I'm going to do these next 4 before it gets dark. It's dark. It's getting dark right now. And I'm going to just run through these really quick and get these done. And then when I'm done, it'll look like that. And then maybe I'll do an update video and show you how I'm going to mix the soil for this. I'm going to be using the compost I brought out that was from this originally. So I'm going to take 50% of that compost, and I'm going to mix it with some other stuff and how I revitalize it, and I'm going to put it back in this container, and we should be good to go. Now, that soil that's out there probably should have sat through the winter, but I didn't do it last year. It was a lot of work. My back was hurting, and so I didn't get to it. So I might pay the price this year a little bit for it, but I think we'll be all right. But normally, if you do this, you want your soil, you want to empty the soil out at the end of the year, September, October, and let it sit in your compost pile like that out there for the whole winter. And then when spring comes, that soil is totally ready. Now you can mix that with some new soil, some peat moss, and other stuff that you like to do. That soil will be fine. You won't have to worry about diseases generally reoccurring, like root rot or blight or any of that stuff will generally kill it. All right, so I got to finish these up, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.